When I was making my video for the ending of The Bear's third season, I was surprised by how many people online appeared to have turned entirely on the show so soon after its nearly perfect second season. Season 3 had its problems. It lacked the resolution we come to expect, it felt stretched out to make one season into two, some of that extra padding made room for a really fantastic Tina-focused episode, but some of it was self-indulgent and led to too many real-world chef cameos for my taste. But overall, the creatives involved were responsible for this thing I really liked, so I imagined it would all make sense once the fourth season came out. Now that that's happened, I'm not entirely sure what to think about how it wrapped up. I should preface this by saying that season 4 was a much more enjoyable watch than the last one, but I fully expected that it was being set up as a conclusion for the series. In a way, episode 10 is presented as that, and at least as far as Carmy's story is concerned, it could work as that, which is kind of where we started. It was a story about this troubled guy who made it out of a sticky situation and made something of himself, only to be sucked back in when he has to come home to deal with the aftermath of his brother's unfortunate end. In season 4, Carmy hit most of the points his character needed to. Watching him inherit and try to turn things around at the original Beef presented all the major hurdles he needed to clear to heal his trauma. Creating the Bear highlighted how the thing that gave his life meaning, being one of the best chefs in the world, was also killing him, which for me at least was the hook of the whole story by that point. Throughout the series, we were reminded that personal relationships were a particular problem for Carm, and that his absence from his family made sense for his well-being at the time, but left things fractured. We also saw how he responded to that negative experience by avoiding relationships with anyone. By the finale of season 4, he realized that obsessing over his work was functioning as a way to avoid his feelings about those things, and that he was using his status as one of the best in the world as a shelter to avoid very real things he needed to take care of. In the lead up to the finale, he began to shift away from that by taking steps to reconcile the key personal relationships the show had established. He finally went to apologize to Claire, explaining that he loved her so much it made him feel like he was on fire. While he meant that in the best way, as in it made him feel so good he felt like he was on fire, that still wasn't a feeling he knew what to do with. Claire is still hurt from what he said when he was locked in the freezer and how that went down, including his silence in the months that have passed. So she's not ready to jump back into a relationship again, but if nothing else, it shows growth on his end. The kind of growth that makes fulfilling, lasting personal relationships possible for him. Their conversation leads to a moment of vulnerability when he calls Claire from outside of his mother's house, telling her she's wonderful and saying he should have said so more often when they were together. This comes out after she commended him for being there in the first place, acknowledging that she knows how hard it is for him to see his mother. And she mentions a green sweatshirt she lost there at one of Richie's birthday parties when Donna almost burnt the house down grilling pizzas. It's one of those things that everyone alludes to when they're telling Tiff's new husband Frank about the Berzatto experience at the wedding. And season 2 presented what a horror show Carmen's family life could be with an erratic, belligerent, hard-drinking mother. Ever since Donna has been introduced, her presence has loomed over Carmy's story as an immovable object. A non-negotiable as far as him learning to move forward. The Donna we first met in Fishes didn't appear capable of reconciliation. However, the one who greets Carmy in the 4th season when he reluctantly agrees to return a photo book to her at home is visibly in a different place. We learn that she's been sober for almost a year, and she acknowledges the mistake she's made while offering an earnest apology. Like Claire, Carmy can't completely move past what happened in an instant, but the fear he had of his mother appears to be replaced with a sincere empathy. When he makes her a meal, it's not a deflection or attempt at damage control. It's a son trying to do something nice for his mother despite their rocky history. It leaves things in a place where healing between them feels possible, and in the downtime while he's making the meal, he finds Claire's green sweatshirt in his childhood bedroom, setting the stage for them to meet up again so he can return it. Neither of these situations is neatly resolved because that's not how relationships work, but given that these were external pressures, what we get is enough to show his growth. Because as was established by the giant countdown clock, Uncle Jimmy, and the computer installed in the kitchen, time is ticking for the bear. We saw in season 3 that Jimmy was experiencing financial difficulties, and losing money at the restaurant wasn't something he could continue to do. The cliffhanger there was the release of their first review, and in the season 4 premiere, we found out it wasn't good. The mandate became to turn things around or shut down and cut the losses, and they only have a 2-month parachute to get it done. Story-wise, most of the season revolved around getting things back on track, with everyone pitching in as Carmy tried to right the ship. Going into the finale, things were moving in the right direction for the Bears as they ran out of time. Bringing in Jess and the ever front-of-house hitters helped to correct some of the issues the Tribune review pointed out. Bringing in Luca to stage for Marcus, flipping the script from his magical trip to Copenhagen, giving him the space to become recognized as one of the best up-and-coming chefs according to Food and Wine magazine. According to the computer, none of this matters. The Bears a lost cause anyway. The potential for growth is just not that significant, but his numbers do show that it could be possible to make it work. And that's without taking into consideration what Ibrahim was cooking up with Meathead from All in the Family. But as a numbers guy, the computer just didn't see the point. In the flashback scene with Mikey in the season premiere, we find out what the point was supposed to be for Carmen. He reasoned that all of their best memories were in restaurants because they're special places people go to be taken care of. And even though Mikey warned him it was a fucked business, the fact that it was gnarly and hard and brutal and not everyone can do it inspired him because he believed he could and that it was worth doing. To make a place people would want to come to on their great days and even more on their shitty ones because they can make it calm and delicious and play good music and take care of people. Of course, this is followed by Carmy waking up on the couch with the scene from Groundhog Day playing to highlight what his effort had produced so far. But I mean, what would the show be about if the characters weren't forced to make changes? Motivations aside, there were still 2 major relationships Carm needed to reconcile before anything could be resolved about the restaurant's future. He had spent most of season 3 overlooking Sydney's contributions while not consulting with her on decisions. This was on top of pushing everyone else away while obsessing in ways that were hard for anyone to understand, and refusing to make peace with Richie. The latter appeared more than happy to stoke the fires of their rivalry, and Sid was courted by Chef Adam, who was starting a new restaurant after Ever closed. She went back and forth on the opportunity for most of the season, which it should be noted was a much better choice on paper. This is laid out beautifully in episode 4, one of the season's best. Ultimately, she chose her dysfunctional found family at the Bear, unaware that Carmy had altered the partnership agreement to remove himself, thereby setting up his planned departure, which he didn't tell anyone about except for Pete, who had made the changes to the paperwork. Her discovery sets up their confrontation, which unfolds behind the restaurant in the finale after the final shift covered by the countdown clock. It should be added that in addition to spending months grappling with the decision to stay, Sid is also coming off a scare after her father was hospitalized for a heart attack. The way this is constructed is that, as viewers, we're ahead of Sid here because we've been watching Carmy taking these steps towards change. Clever character interactions are peppered throughout the first couple of episodes, which we'll later realize serve as seeds that help foster a new way of Carmy seeing things. Tina talking about not getting sleep because she and her husband had a fight and went to bed without apologizing, saying, "I can't have that shit hanging over my head. It makes you make bad decisions." This is just one example. If you go back, there are a ton of them. And in these interactions, we see Carm taking note of things that will all come out by the end. So we know he's doing what he thinks is right. But to Sydney, it looks like he's doing what he always does, engaging in self-sabotage and then running away when things start to fall apart. And why shouldn't it? It's exactly where Richie goes when he hears the news as well. It sounds hollow when Carm says that's not what he's doing, especially considering how things played out. It looks like he flew the plane directly at the mountain and then handed her the controls, telling her she was better suited to stop it from crashing. Plus, if you think back to the beginning and why she's there in the first place, she came there to work with him, and his being there was a huge part of her making the decision to stay. Carm's able to reframe things somewhat by admitting she's everything he'll never be. She's considerate, allows herself to feel things, is a natural leader and teacher, and she cares. When he asks her directly, she admits she doesn't know why, but she loves doing what they do there, which is something he's not sure he can say is true for him anymore. He adds that he'll stick around until they get out of debt, so he's not leaving her holding the bag, and he believes this is the best thing for the restaurant. That's an immediate point of contention because, as I've mentioned, she can't imagine the restaurant without him there. But other than that, he basically says all the right stuff. Her being there is what made it all possible, even going as far as to say she's the bear. While it all makes sense to him, as you watch Sid try to wrap her head around what feels like an unforgivable betrayal and abandonment, it brings to mind the review's subheading. The bear stumbles with culinary dissonance. Dissonance has been on the menu since the beginning, and you could make an argument that it's what made the first season so relatable, which is why there is a satisfying release to see Sid getting everything off her chest finally. Her bit about the elephant in the restaurant and how she's sorry that his family had to go through this, has to work through this awful thing that happened to them, acknowledging that, but then also saying it doesn't make it okay to take it out on the restaurant or her. It's some of the best truth-telling anyone in the show's done. To return to how things are constructed, the decision to strip this episode down to just these three actors in this closed space that's also outside the restaurant was the right choice. It confines everyone, but it also gives them some space to operate. Each of the actors delivers a performance that cements it as one of the show's heaviest entries. And when Richie comes out to join the conversation, the show finally hits the emotional climax that the past two seasons have been promising. While things were bad with Sid, we'd seen that quiet moments of reflection when they were alone were possible. The problem was that it became harder for her to believe anything that came out of those conversations as time dragged on. With Richie, everything erupted into a shouting match, with both sides digging themselves in rather than moving forward in any kind of meaningful way. For me, this was tiring. The chaos and shouting in the first seasons rang true of how it feels to work shifts at jobs like these. Watching two grown men scream at each other like babies for 19 episodes in a row might also be true to life, but I was in desperate need for someone to activate the release valve by the end of season 3. So by the end of season 4, it was a non-negotiable. Luckily, it does end here, but there was a moment where it looked like it might not. As mentioned, Richie is in the same boat as Sid in thinking that Carm is doing what he does best. Classic escapism. Choosing flight over fight. The restaurant is down and they're getting the shit kicked out of them, so he does what he does and takes off. He doesn't want to hear Carmen's reasoning as to why that isn't what he's doing, because his prior actions speak for themselves as far as he's concerned. It almost gets left like that until Richie decides to take things up a notch when Carm says he's trying to put the restaurant first, by adding like you put your family first. This is like putting salt in everyone's wounds and prompts Carm to tell him that he went to Michael's funeral. This is something we kind of knew from the season 3 premiere, where we saw him sitting in his car outside the funeral while everyone was coming out. Plus, Lee mentioned seeing him inside before he dipped out when they talked in the wedding episode earlier this season. But this is something that Richie had no idea about, so it rocks him. What sticks with you about this is that this is the kind of thing that he was going to work in the kitchen to try to forget. He flew halfway across the country to be with family and friends after the tragic loss of his brother, the person in his family who meant the most to him, and couldn't figure out how to be there with them, to just do what people do and lean on each other in times of grief. Richie has his elephant moment when he gets to unload all of what he's been carrying around with him, which leads to both of them sharing the resentments they had for each other. Carm's revolves around how close Cousin was with Mikey, that he really knew him in a way Carmy never did. Richie talks about how he felt like he failed trying to help Mikey when his addiction got bad, and how he thought that was why Carm didn't come to the funeral. His resentment stemmed from loving the Berzattos but feeling like they didn't love him the way they loved Carm because he wasn't really a part of the family. So all of that has been under the surface of everything we've seen Richie do since Carmy returned at the beginning of season 1. He also thought that Carmen had gotten out and was living this exciting life, which Richie couldn't imagine. He was so jealous of that he bought a cookbook of his own, which only reinforced the idea that Carm must really be something if he could figure out all the insane stuff he saw in there. From his point of view, it seems wrong to walk away from something like that. His honesty opens the door for Carm to explain that he doesn't know who he is outside the kitchen, before assuring them that the restaurant will be okay without him. After some back and forth, Richie agrees, saying that he knows it will be because they still have Sydney, who is looking for some reinforcement of her own. They let that settle in, admitting no one is sure how they'll go about fixing things. And then Sid says she's on board, but needs the partnership agreement updated to add Richie. He says it's not necessary because this is his home and he's not going anywhere. But after some reassurance that this is real, that this is what the future is shaping up to look like, he emphatically says it's an honor and agrees to be a partner, and that's pretty much it. Sugar comes out at the end to see what's happening. She just hugs Carm when Sydney tells her he's quitting the restaurant, probably all restaurants, and Richie says that he was at Mikey's funeral, building on a conversation she had with Carm earlier in the season. She gets it because they had talked about the spark he had when he left for New York and how it was great that he found something he loved and it being okay to not love it anymore. Because what mattered was that he was capable of that in the first place. The season then ends with a shot of the countdown clock hitting 0. As I mentioned at the beginning, the viewing experience for me was significantly better than season 3, with a couple of all-time episodes and a moving finale. Most of the things that didn't work for me in the third installment were noticeably dialed back as well. Cameos were at an all-time low, and there were fewer fact-heavy scenes. As a ticking clock enjoyer, I was a little surprised by how tensionless the device of literally installing one in the middle of the show's world turned out to be. But I guess it makes sense that things were already on a clock before that, and time was really running out on Carm's chance to make the relationship in his life work, because there's a version of this story where he keeps the restaurant afloat, they all make money, but he continues being miserable while bringing everything and everyone around him down with him. The end of the season puts me in a weird spot because it doesn't feel like the end of a series, or at least not the one they originally set out to tell, and for whatever reason they're making it seem like this could be the end. I think this show should end, and I was expecting these 10 episodes to be it. At the same time, even though we reached this point with Carmy, which I outlined here, they planted seeds of doubt in the story leading up to the end. What was up with the obvious Michelin star guy, who, if you're not sure that was the intention, in the earlier scene they specifically added the detail that they do things like use street names from the city they're in as their last names when they book their tables, and then had the driver call him Mr. Clark so we could pick up on that. A simple Google search reveals that there's a Clark Street in Chicago, and when I pulled it up on maps, it was centered on Wrigley Field, which makes me think it's a street that people who have spent time in the city are familiar with. Getting the star was a thing that could have turned everything around, and Mr. Clark was there for one of the most heartwarming experiences we saw anyone have at the Bear since it opened. Not only did Richie say all the right things and get him an original beef sandwich off menu, but he also witnessed the fake snow and hot chocolate experience they put together for the family who came in on the gift certificate to celebrate their daughter being cancer-free for 6 months. The setups and payoffs were something this show always did well, so that and Ibrahim's whole side story of franchising the beef window, something that would also change the dynamics underlying Carm's decision to walk away at the end, just seem like weird choices to invest the time into if you're not planning on revisiting them. If you think about the way we knew about the funeral and had seen the call from Adam to Carm earlier in the season, if you think about these small details that turned out to make you feel dialed in when they came back up, things that reward you for paying close attention, I don't think it's weird to have an expectation of wanting to know if they get the star or not, or if Ibrahim's extra credit work ends up saving the fine dining side. I mean, maybe that's the point, that none of that should matter because it only reinforces the idea that the restaurant will be okay. And either way, Carm is making steps in a positive direction, something we're rooting for him to do, something that has never materialized to this point, not really. It does back up his claim that the right team is in place, but so did the rest of the season. The only thing that Tina did in these 10 episodes was shave a minute off her cook time. I don't want to end on a downer, but I'd be lying if I said these past 2 seasons wouldn't create some dissonance if they were the end. On the one hand, you catch a glimpse of something like the password being Fast Boat Mojitos, all one word, and the moment where you think the up-and-coming chef is going to be Sid, and it turns out to be Marcus, and that just hits like a ton of bricks. But in a show where all the character moments still work so well for me because I'm invested in what happens to these characters, a show that looks this great and sounds this good even, with all these incredible performances, I don't know. It doesn't seem like the end, but also feels like it could possibly turn out to be that. It's kind of a cop-out to say it puts us in a place similar to the main character's experience, but it's kind of where we are. I honestly can't imagine there not being another season. Still, at the time I'm making this video, they haven't announced it yet, so maybe there's more to it than what's been made public, but I would definitely watch, and I think that's a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.